After studying this module, you shall be able to comprehend ANCOVA as it is applied to research. Learn the use of ANCOVA in research investigations, identify the application areas for ANCOVA, evaluate the difference between ANOVA and ANCOVA, and have a numerical understanding of the concept. The first time Indian audience saw our national superhero Shaktiman in 1997, it was considered a phenomenon. The belief in a superhero reached to such an extent that children jumped out from the roofs of their homes, thinking Shaktiman is going to come and save them. At the same time, it was a new sort of entertainment too. Those children who had watched it earlier, if have to watch it today, or those who were born after the Shaktiman era, would experience it to be funny and poor quality technology use. Considering newer present generation movies like Krish 3 or Avengers, we have no doubt moved on and the present ones seem more attractive. If one is asked to rate the best product of all, it might not be easy, considering the first time experience that one had with respect to that particular age of ours in which we enjoyed this new phenomenon, that is Shaktiman, making entry in India. In order to really understand which one was the best, thus one will have to take into considerations the entertainment, technical superiority and fun attributable to one's age at that point of time. The statistical technique of ANCOVA provides a measure to factor in other variables that may be influencing the outcome variable. ANCOVA will provide a purer measure of how much variance in the above example is attributable to the event itself, entertainment or technology. The important point to notice here is that many a times while investigating a problem, the researcher tends to study the independent and dependent variable relationship, ignoring the underlying dependent covariates that may intervene in the relationship. This intervention of dependent covariate contaminates the relationship and produces results which may not be pure and thus fraught with errors. It is therefore important that a statistical procedure be developed that helps in identifying the variance contributed by the covariate, thus helping the researcher in arriving at a much purer understanding of the relationship between the dependent and the independent variables. The concept of ANCOVA. The quantitative methods of research focus on establishing and analyzing the relationships between the independent and dependent variables in the data. The data varies in the degree of complexity with the types of research designs chosen. The experimental and correlational designs focus on the idea of analyzing one dependent variable at a time. The data with different levels of an independent variable has been analyzed using a t-test or an ANOVA. The interaction between the different levels of independent variable could be checked using MANOVA also. However, this may not be the case in all the situations, as many a times several dependent variables may act in tandem. When such variables are continuous in their impact on the dependent variable, they are referred to as covariates. The ANCOVA is used to study the differences between the different levels of an independent variable for the possible effects of the covariates on the results. Let us take an example. It is hypothesized that mnemonic techniques used will have an effect on the recall. There are many variables like age, gender, training experience, reasoning ability, etc. that may affect the link between the mnemonic technique and the recall. The ANCOVA allows to study the possible effect of these continuous variables on the results. By studying this, one can get purer results. This can throw better light on the relationship between the independent and the dependent variables. So ANCOVA basically extends the idea of ANOVA but takes into account the variance contributed by the covariates also that influence the outcome variable. So when we measure the covariates and include them in the analysis, it is called analysis of covariance, or ANCOVA in short. There are two main reasons why we include covariates in ANOVA: to reduce the within group variance and to eliminate the confounding variable. ANCOVA. ANCOVA is a method of applying statistical technique to produce a valid evaluation of the outcome of an experiment. For instance, an investigator is trying to study one independent variable A and wants to control the influence of an uncontrolled variable called the covariance or the concomitant variables B, which are known to correlate with dependent variable. ANCOVA is used to yield a reliable result. Thus, ANCOVA becomes a procedure for statistical control. The regression equation for ANOVA can be extended to include one or more continuous variables that can predict the outcome of dependent variable. These continuous variables are not part of the main experimental manipulation but do impact the dependent variable and are referred to as covariates. When covariates are included in the analysis of variance, it becomes ANCOVA. For example, the quality of an individual's dance performance will not only depend on the amount of practice but also on the age, physical flexibility, interest of the individual and so on. If the variables apart from duration of practice are considered as covariates and are measured, it becomes possible to control their influence on dependent variable by including them in the regression model. The figure 1 below describes the layout plan for a single factor ANCOVA design. There are k treatment with n subjects and each subject is tested for before application of the independent variable and that is x, and after introducing the independent variable y. So x is the covariate and y is the observation criteria of the same subject after the treatment. Use of ANCOVA. ANCOVA as a statistical technique enables us to reduce within group variance or error variance by firstly comparing the variability in data that can be explained by the experiment and variability that cannot be explained by the experiment. If this unexplained variance can be described in terms of other variables or covariates, error variance gets reduced, allowing more accurate assessment of the effect of the independent variable. Thus, use of 2 or 3 covariates in such studies can be considered, which have relatively low correlations with each other, as each covariate will remove a part of the error variance from the dependent variable. ANCOVA also helps in eliminating the systematic bias, confounds or unmeasured variables that vary systematically with experimental manipulations. Systematic bias implies that group differs systematically on a key variable that is related to performance on dependent variable. For instance, if there are treatments involved in groups, a significant difference on a post-test after giving the treatments will be mixed with initial difference, as it would be unclear whether the treatments are making the difference or whether the initial differences are simply transferred to the post-test means. For instance, if one is comparing the effect of 4 stress situations on blood pressure, the third situation may have been found to be more significantly stressful than the other 3. At the same time, blood pressure of the subject in group 3 under minimal stress is found to be greater than the subjects of the other group. One now as a researcher needs to find out whether the blood pressure for group 3 would still be higher if the post-test mean of all the 4 groups were adjusted in a way to account for initial differences in blood pressure. Later one notes that the post-test means are adjusted in a linear manner to what they would be if all groups started out equally on the covariates, that is at the grand mean. The best possible way to eliminate this bias may be random assignment of subjects, and hence within sampling error one would be confident that groups don't differ systematically on variables. But in many studies, random assignment may not be possible. So one might partially equate the groups by either matching on key variables or by using ANCOVA to control the key variance. ANCOVA reduces but not eliminates the bias caused by these variables, and once identified, the confounding variable can be measured and entered into the analysis as a covariate. The process of ANCOVA. The process of application of ANCOVA involves removal of the influence of uncontrolled variable by the method of simple linear regression. The residual sums of squares are used to provide variance estimates, which further are used to make tests of significance. And the diagram here gives a stepwise analysis of the process of application of ANCOVA as it occurs. One can also choose covariates by keeping the following things in mind. A covariate can be variables which are significantly correlating with the dependent variable, at least theoretically, and less amongst each other. Covariates can be variables shown to correlate on similar types of subjects. The assumptions of ANCOVA. The assumptions for ANCOVA are independence of covariates and treatment effect. ANOVA partitions the experimental effect into two parts, one representing the experimental or treatment effect and the other being error or the unexplained variance. ANCOVA on the other hand takes into account the covariate sharing its variance with a bit of the dependent variable that is currently unexplained or which is completely independent from the treatment effect. But one may often confuse the use of ANCOVA and apply it to situations where the effect of covariate overlaps with the experimental effects. That is, the experimental effect is confounded with the effect of covariates. Thus, here the covariates will reduce the experimental effect as it would explain some of the variance that is otherwise attributed to the experiment. Therefore, in the absence of independence of covariates and treatment effect, the latter gets obscured. Consider the example that obesity and cardiac problems are closely related, such that obese individuals tend to develop cardiac problems early in life. So, if one wants to compare these obese individuals with non-obese individuals on some physical tasks, the chances are that the obese group would also have cardiac issues like shortness of breath or poor stamina in some obese individuals than the non-obese group, believed to be good in their stamina. By removing the cardiac problems as covariates into the analysis, the pure effect of obesity on the task may be seen, but is something that is not possible because obesity and cardiac problems share variance. It can be avoided by randomizing participants to the experimental group or matching experimental groups on the covariate. It can be represented and explained by field. It has been represented and explained in the diagram. Look into the ANOVA situation. The total variance in the task has been bifurcated into the one explained by obesity and the other is unexplained variance. In ANCOVA, the total variance in the task is variance explained by obesity and the variance explained by the covariance. The wrong applications of ANCOVA situation, the total variance in the task performance, the variance explained by obesity and the unexplained variance, and both of them have an overlap of the variance explained by the covariate. The other assumption is the homogeneity of slopes of regression. When ANCOVA is applied, the relationship between outcome or dependent variable and the covariate is understood. A regression line is fitted to the data, ignoring the group to which a particular individual becomes. Thus, it assumes the overall relationship to be true for all groups of participants. This implies that if there is a positive relationship between the covariate and the outcome in one group, a positive relationship is assumed for the rest of the group as well. But the relationship between the outcome and the covariate differs across the groups. Then the regression model does not represent all the groups and is inaccurate. This being the homogeneity of regression slopes should show the regression lines to be similar to each other. ANCOVA and its applications. ANCOVA as a statistical technique has the following applications. In experimental designs, it is used to control factors that cannot be randomized but can be measured on interval scales. In observational designs, it can be used to remove the effects of variables that alter the relationship of independent and dependent variables. It creates a more powerful test in an experimental study, and it reduces bias when one compares intact or self-selected groups like males and females. It is used in teaching methods based researches that use intact classrooms, and it is also used in adjusted post-test means on the outcome variable for any initial differences present on a pre-test. For instance, if average IQ for classrooms differ by 10 points, adjustment of post-test achievement can be done. Let us look into the prerequisites for the application of ANCOVA to the research data. The focus of analysis of ANCOVA is that the purpose of using ANCOVA in quantitative psychological research is to compare the mean differences among the number of groups when the dependent variable has been adjusted for one or more covariates. The variables in ANCOVA, in simple one-way ANCOVA, there may be just one independent variable. However, with increased complexity in design, the number of independent variables may be more than 1-2. The dependent variable in ANCOVA must be continuously scaled in interval or ratio levels of measurement. The relationship among the variables or among the groups or the samples. ANCOVA has number of groups being compared and the dependent variable scores are not related, that is, they are independent. The underlying assumptions are the assumptions of normality and homogeneity of variance. Comparing ANOVA and ANCOVA, it is important for the students of quantitative methods to understand the differences between ANOVA and ANCOVA as a statistical procedure to better understanding of errors and real variances contributed by the data. Also, the applications of the two procedures to the research data would enable a higher validity in the research. There is a diagrammatic representation which explains the differences and commonalities between ANOVA and ANCOVA. The numerical application of ANCOVA. Using IBM SPSS 20 for ANCOVA. Let us take an example to demonstrate the use of IBM SPSS 20 software for the calculation of ANCOVA. A researcher wishes to study the effect of substance abuse treatment conditions on the duration of abstinence when adjustment for the covariate of age is made among the adults. The independent variables has two substance abuse treatment conditions, standard care and standard care with contingency management. A sample of 150 adults with problem of substance were randomly assigned to the two treatment conditions. The research design chosen is two-group post-test only randomized design with covariate, which in this case is the age. To get the ANCOVA results, the following steps may be taken after entering the data. Click Analyze, go to click General Linear Model, click Univariate, click over LDA under Dependent Variable, Treatment Condition under Fixed Factors and Age over to Covariate. Click on the Plots button and click Treatment Condition to Horizontal Axis. Click the Add button and click Continue. Click on the Options button, click Overall and the treatment conditions to display means for select compare main effects, select LSD none. Click on the boxes for descriptive statistics, estimates of effect size, observed power and homogeneity test. The significance level should be 0.01 and go to click on continue, click OK and save the generated output as ENCOVA with age results. The summary of the text. The ENCOVA is used to study the differences between the different levels of an independent variable for the possible effects of covariates on the results. When covariates get included in ANOVA, it becomes ENCOVA. ENCOVA is a statistical control procedure that yields a purer and accurate evaluation of the result of an experiment, as it reduces the biases or errors attributable to factors covarying with the dependent variable. ENCOVA as a statistical technique enables to reduce within group or error variance by firstly comparing the variability in the data that can be explained by the experiment and variability. ENCOVA helps in eliminating systematic bias, confounds or the unmeasured variables that vary systematically with experimental manipulation. The regression equation for ANOVA can be extended to include one or more continuous variables that can predict the outcome or dependent variable. Its applicability ranges from experimental to observational designs, producing more powerful statistical results. The underlying assumptions for ENCOVA are assumptions for normality, homogeneity of variance, and they can be checked for the data while ENCOVA is being applied. Numerical example, an IBM SPSS 20 software for calculation of ENCOVA from the data is also explained in the text, and a solved computational application of ENCOVA to the data is also present.